John Hancock, you know the signature. It's so big, so bold. It's practically a symbol of American independence itself. The story goes he signed the Declaration that way so the king could read it without his glasses. But what if I told you that to the British? That famous signature belonged to one of the most wanted men in the colonies. This isn't just the story of a patriot. It's the story of a wealthy merchant accused of being America's richest smuggler, who became a revolutionary icon and a personal target of the king. He was a man of immense power and influence who put his entire fortune on the line for liberty. But was his rebellion really born from pure principle? Or was it a savvy business move to protect his massive and sometimes illegal commercial empire? To get the man and the revolution he helped pay for, we first have to see how he became one of the wealthiest people in all of colonial America. Section 1. The rise of a merchant, Prince John Hancock's story starts not in some grand mansion, but in the humble home of a pastor in Braintree, Massachusetts, born on January 23, 1737. He was supposed to follow his father and grandfather into ministry, but fate had a much more profitable detour in mind. When his father died, 7-year-old John was sent to live with his wealthy, childless uncle and aunt, Thomas and Lydia Hancock, in Boston. This wasn't just a change of scenery. Thomas Hancock was the owner of the House of Hancock, a massive trading business, and one of New England's richest men, living in the lavish Hancock Manor on Beacon Hill. John was adopted as their own, and his life was put on a totally different track. He got the best education money could buy, attending Boston Latin School and graduating from Harvard at just 17. But his real schooling took place on Hancock's Wharf, the heart of his uncle's empire. The House of Hancock was a powerhouse, importing fancy European goods and shipping out colonial staples like rum, whale oil, and fish. Thomas wasn't just a merchant. He was a master of logistics and networking, landing lucrative government contracts, a skill his nephew watched closely and would later use for his own revolutionary purposes. To round out his education, John was sent to London for a year. There, he built connections with suppliers and saw the heart of the British Empire up close, arriving around the time the man he would one day defy, King George III, ascended to the throne. When he returned, he was made a full partner. And when Thomas Hancock died in 1764, John, at only 27, inherited everything: the business, the mansion, the ships, the land. Just like that, he became one of the richest men in the 13 colonies. With his money, charm, and flair for fashion, Hancock was a natural fit for public life. Frankly, he liked politics more than balancing ledgers. In 1765, he was elected as a Boston selectman, kicking off his political career just as tensions with Great Britain were starting to boil over. The Crown, buried in debt from the French and Indian War, decided the colonies were the perfect place to raise some cash. This new policy was on a direct collision course with John Hancock's business. The first big hit was the Stamp Act of 1765, which slapped a tax on all legal and public documents. For a shipping magnate like Hancock, who signed mountains of paperwork every day, this was a logistical and financial nightmare. At first, his objections were more about economics than high-minded principles. But as he saw the explosive protests in Boston, his thinking began to change. He joined the boycott of British goods, a move that made him wildly popular with the people and a key player in the resistance, where he was mentored by the fiery radical Samuel Adams. Now, while historians haven't found a signed confession, smuggling was basically standard operating procedure for colonial merchants trying to dodge British taxes. You'd bribe a customs official, underreport your cargo, and sell your goods for cheaper than the guy following the rules. Given Hancock's outspoken hatred of taxes and his position as a top merchant, it's almost certain he was involved. The popular joke at the time was that Sam Adams writes the letters and John Hancock pays the postage. It was a perfect partnership of ideology and money, and it put a giant target on Hancock's back. The British, determined to stamp out smuggling, sent a new American Board of Customs to Boston in 1767. These guys couldn't be bribed. They were there to enforce the law, especially the hated new Townshend Acts. And they had their sights set on Boston's richest, loudest, and most troublesome patriot, John Hancock. Maybe they truly suspected he was a smuggler, or maybe they just wanted to make an example of him. Either way, a storm was brewing, and it was all about to come to a head over a single ship, the Liberty. Section 2. The smuggling scandal in the road to revolution. The year is 1768, and Boston is a powder keg. The Townshend Act had slapped new taxes on everyday imports like glass, paper, and tea. The goal was to use this money to pay royal officials directly, making them loyal to the king instead of the colonists they governed. To the colonists, this was tyranny, plain and simple, taxation without representation. To enforce it all, British customs officials were given writs of assistance, basically blank search warrants to hunt for smuggled goods anywhere, anytime. This wasn't just an annoyance. It was a direct attack on the livelihood of merchants like John Hancock. For many, smuggling became an act of defiance, a way to fight back against unjust laws and keep the local economy alive. Hancock, already a political headache for the royal government, became their number one target. He snubbed the new customs commissioners, refusing to even be in the same room with them. They were just waiting for a chance to bring him down. Their first attempt failed in April 1768, when Hancock personally blocked 2 agents from searching his ship, the Lydia, without a proper warrant. An attorney general agreed with Hancock, which only made the commissioners angrier. They wouldn't have to wait long for another shot. On May 9, 1768, Hancock's sloop, the Liberty, sailed into Boston Harbor carrying Madeira wine. When officials inspected it, they found only 25 large casks, a tiny fraction of the ship's capacity. It was suspicious. They figured most of the wine was unloaded secretly overnight to dodge the tax. But with no proof, they had to accept Hancock's payment on the declared cargo. Everything changed with the arrival of the HMS Romney, a 50-gun warship, sent to back up the customs agents. Its captain started forcing local sailors into the Royal Navy, sparking riots in the streets. With military muscle behind them, the customs officials got bold. A month after the Liberty docked, one of the customs agents, a man named Thomas Kirk, suddenly changed his story. He now swore that a huge amount of wine had been smuggled ashore. He claimed he'd been held against his will in the ship's cabin, threatened, and bribed to keep his mouth shut. Was Kirk telling the truth? Was he pressured by his bosses? Or was he tempted by the fact that informants got a 1/3 cut of any confiscated goods? We'll never know for sure, but his testimony was all the commissioners needed. On June 10, 1768, as the Liberty was being loaded with a new cargo of fish, customs officials seized the ship. But they didn't just seize it. In a calculated act of intimidation, they had sailors from the HMS Romney tow the Liberty away from Hancock's wharf and anchor it directly under the warship's cannons. To the people of Boston, this was the ultimate insult. They were physically ripping the property of the city's most famous merchant out of their community. Word spread like wildfire. A massive crowd, maybe 3,000 strong, swarmed the docks. It quickly turned into a full-blown riot. The mob beat up the customs commissioners, who fled for their lives to the Romney and later to a fort in the harbor. The rioters then smashed the windows of their homes. For a grand finale, they dragged the commissioner's personal pleasure boat through the streets to the Liberty Tree, a symbol of colonial resistance, and burned it to a crisp. The Liberty affair was a turning point. John Hancock, the rich merchant, was now a political martyr, a symbol of defiance against British tyranny. But his legal fight was just getting started. The Crown sued Hancock in a special vice-admiralty court. Colonists hated these courts. There were no juries, and the royally appointed judges got a cut of fines. Hancock was facing a ruinous penalty of £9,000. He hired a brilliant young lawyer to defend him, his friend John Adams. Adams didn't just argue the facts. He attacked the entire system, declaring that a court without a jury trial stripped Hancock of his basic rights as an Englishman. The prosecution's case fell apart. Their star witness was shaky and inconsistent. Then, after 5 long months, the Crown suddenly dropped all charges without explanation. Hancock was free and more popular than ever, but he never got his ship back. The government kept the Liberty, refitted it, and, in a final twist of the knife, turned it into a customs patrol boat to hunt smugglers off the coast of Rhode Island. This was too much for the people of Newport. In July 1769, After the hated ship seized another vessel, a mob of angry Rhode Islanders took matters into their own hands. They attacked the Liberty, ran it aground, and, in one of the first overt acts of violence against Crown, burned the ship down to the waterline. The Liberty was gone, but the fire it started was spreading. For John Hancock, there was no turning back. The British had tried to ruin him. Instead, they'd made him a revolutionary. Section 3. The Patriot leader of the Liberty affair changed everything for John Hancock. He was no longer just a rich guy complaining about taxes. He was a full-blown resistance hero who had stared down the British Empire and won. His fame exploded across the colonies. The dispute over wine tariffs had pushed him from a businessman protecting his profits to a radical leader fighting for a cause. In the years that followed, Hancock poured his money and influence into the revolution. He helped fund the committees of correspondence, the secret network that united the colonies. He led protests against the Tea Act and the brutal coercive acts that followed. Samuel Adams may have provided the revolutionary ideas, but John Hancock wrote the checks that kept the movement alive. All this attention made him a marked man. By 1774, he was president of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress, the colony's illegal shadow government, and a delegate to the Second Continental Congress. These weren't just titles. They were acts of treason. Living in Boston became too dangerous. Hancock and Samuel Adams fled to Lexington. It was there on the night of April 18, 1775, that Paul Revere came galloping into town with his famous warning. The British were coming. Intelligence suggested the troops had two goals: seize colonial weapons in Concord and capture Hancock and Adams. While official orders from General Gage didn't explicitly name the men, their arrest was widely believed to be a primary objective. Hancock, a militia colonel, wanted to grab a musket and join the fight on Lexington Green. But Adams convinced him he was far more valuable as a leader and a financier than as a soldier on the front line. Reluctantly, he and Adams escaped just hours before the shot heard round the world kicked off the American Revolution. Hancock made his way to Philadelphia and the Second Continental Congress. His reputation preceded him. His immense wealth gave the moderates confidence, while his history of defying the crown made him a hero to the radicals. It was a perfect combination. On May 24, 1775, he was unanimously elected president of the Continental Congress. It was an incredible twist of fate. The man Britain considered a master smuggler was now leading a new American government. As president, he oversaw the creation of the Continental Army and Navy. He spent his days writing letters, pleading for money, supplies, and troops for George Washington's struggling army. In the Revolution's darkest hours, Hancock's financial backing was absolutely critical. There was one moment of personal disappointment. When Congress was choosing a commander-in-chief, Hancock likely hoped for the position himself. He was reportedly crestfallen when John Adams stood up and nominated George Washington instead. But Hancock put his pride aside and got back to work. His greatest moment came in 1776. As president of Congress, he presided over the debates that led to the Declaration of Independence. On July 4th, he was the first to sign. He did it with a huge, flamboyant signature, supposedly declaring, "There, John Bull can read my name without spectacles." He may double his reward. That signature, once tied to a merchant accused of smuggling, was now an immortal symbol of freedom. His name literally became another way to say signature. He served as president until late 1777, steering the new nation through brutal years of war. He eventually returned to Massachusetts, exhausted but not finished. In 1778, he even held a nominal command over 5,000 Massachusetts soldiers in an attempt to retake Newport, Rhode Island, though his poor health required him to delegate most duties. After the war, he was more popular than ever. In 1780, he was elected the first governor of Massachusetts with over 90% of the vote, an office he would hold for 9 terms. One of his final great acts was using his enormous influence to convince a skeptical Massachusetts to ratify the new U.S. Constitution in 1788, helping to cement the foundation of the very nation he had risked everything to create. When John Hancock died in 1793, he was mourned as a founding father. His personal fortune was a shadow of its former self, spent down by years of war and public service. The man who started as one of America's richest merchants had put it all on the line. Conclusion and CTA. So, was John Hancock a principled patriot or just America's richest smuggler? The truth is, he was both. And he probably couldn't have become the patriot without first being the smuggler. Let's be real. Hancock was almost certainly involved in smuggling. It was a common business practice for merchants trying to survive Britain's crushing taxes. His fortune was built on trade, and Britain's aggressive enforcement was a direct threat to his bottom line. The Liberty Affair wasn't just a political fight. It was a business crisis. You could say his initial resistance was simply a pragmatic businessman protecting his assets from a greedy government. But calling it just a business decision misses the point. Other wealthy merchants faced the same pressure and chose to stay loyal to the king. Hancock had a choice. He could have cut a deal with the royal authorities, protected his empire, and lived out his days in luxury. He chose defiance instead. He took the high-minded arguments of men like Sam Adams about liberty and rights and made them his own. The Liberty Affair was a spark that fused his bank account with his political ideals. The British tried to make an example of him, and it backfired spectacularly. They didn't crush him. They turned him into a living symbol of their own oppression. That personal fight transformed him. He went from dodging taxes to funding a revolution. When he put that famous signature on the Declaration of Independence, he was signing away his fortune and, quite possibly, his life. John Hancock's story is the perfect reminder that the American Revolution wasn't fought by saints in powdered wigs. It was messy, complicated, and driven by a mix of high philosophy and very personal interests. Hancock was an aristocrat, a shrewd businessman, and yes, a smuggler. But he was also a man who, when it mattered most, bet everything on the idea of America. He became a patriot because he was a smuggler who got pushed too far. His journey from the counting house to the Continental Congress is the story of the revolution itself, a story born right where principle and profit collide. If you found this look into the complicated life of John Hancock interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that dig deeper into history. And let us know in the comments, do you see Hancock as more of a patriot or a pragmatist? We'd love to hear what you think. Thanks for watching.